And HSTEM. Yay. There's Kevin. There's Sarah. Yay. Alberto. Danica. Carolyn. Brittany. Woo. Alex. Come on. I know you want to wave those hands. Yeah. Awesome. Shari, there you are. Rebecca. Rhonda. Hello. Oh my gosh. Nicole. Kaylee. Yes, Danielle. I have goosebumps. This is so heartwarming. Julia Emerson, there you are. Oh, anybody else? Anybody else just feeling it right now? Yeah, okay. So I'm waiting for, has Sonia Clark showed up yet? Not yet, because we get to start out with a really neat video about her project that is also a very cool collaborative Amherst kind of special thing, and you're going to hear about it when I get to play the video, but I don't want to play it until she's here. So maybe Sonia, if you're here, I had on the schedule to start the video at 8:02. It's now 8:03. What do you think? There she is. Nice, perfect timing. Okay, Sonia, are you there? I'd like you to unmute. We'd love to have you say hello, and then I'm going to play your video. Okay, just made it so that you should be able to speak now.
Hi, everybody. I just joined, so I don't even know what Sheila said. My name is Sonia Clark, and you're going to hear a little bit more about a project that I'm hoping all of you will be involved in. So thank you, Sheila.
Great. Okay, so I'm going to share, and then we'll get to see this lovely video that Sonia made about her project that she's doing. That's also a collaborative.
The time for solidarity is
You hear
right
it?
now. So I've created a collaborative artwork called the Solidarity Book Project. And here's how you can participate. First, tell us what solidarity means to you. Make a recording, send it in. Second, read a passage from a book that taught you something about solidarity. Maybe it's a work of fiction, maybe it's an autobiography, maybe it's a book of poetry, a history or an economics book, maybe it's even a cookbook. Hopefully, it's a book by a Black, Indigenous person of color or an ally. Another way that you can participate is by taking one of those types of books and book sculpting them with the iconic Solidarity Fist. We have instructional videos to show you how to make these. Now, if it feels strange to take a beloved book and manipulate it in this way, we're encouraging you to buy a second copy of that book. But when you buy that second copy, please buy it from a used bookstore, an independent bookstore, or a Black, Indigenous, or person of color owned bookstore. And in that way, you can exercise some of your solidarity as well. We're going to gather up all those recordings and have you send in those books, and they'll be displayed in an exhibition that will take place in the fall of 2021 on Amherst College's campus. For all of these participatory engagements, Amherst has pledged to give money to underserved Black and Indigenous communities by bringing them book knowledge. Here's how this project came about. Amherst College approached me to make an artwork to commemorate its bicentennial. And I couldn't, in good faith, make an artwork like that without first acknowledging that the college sits on land that was stolen from our Indigenous brothers and sisters. So the solidarity begins there. Also, the bicentennial intersects with the 5th year anniversary of the Amherst Uprising, which took place on Amherst College's campus in the Frost Library. It's also an intersection with the 50th anniversary of the formation of the Black Studies Department at Amherst College. So all of these things are coming together. When the exhibition comes to a close and your books get returned to you, then that book might become a seed for an institution in your community to think about how it might use an action similar to this to do its own reparative and restorative justice. And that way, the Solidarity Book Project becomes a replicable model. Join us. Your participation is an effort in exercising our solidarity.
Wow, that just gave me chills. That is great. I hope everybody's going to participate. And now I'm trying to share this screen. Okay, so now can you see? You can see my great. Okay. Yeah, so what I really love about this project that Sonia just introduced to us is that it has a lot of the same ethos that we have in Being Human in STEM. So Being Human in STEM has proven to be a replicable model that has spread to other institutions. And we hope that we're seeding the participants to bring back a lot of the HSTEM education to our own communities and continue the work. And so you'll hear about that as we go through. And we've got such a great lineup that we don't have time to individually introduce everyone as we go. So you'll be able to hang out with people in breakout rooms after, but I'm just gonna jump right in. And we've been welcoming you as you've been coming in. And it's just such a joy to be able to have this crew of HSTEM folks to share with you tonight about this, what started as a 9-student special topics course in the wake of the uprising protests, but has now grown into a grassroots initiative to enhance belonging and equity in our STEM community through partnering across faculty, staff, and students at Amherst. And we might argue into a movement, as 13 institutions across the country have joined our network, and their requests keep coming in. So if we focus on Amherst, 5 years later, we can say that Being Human in STEM is really an intergenerational community of Amherst students, alumni, staff, and faculty across STEM, humanities, and social sciences disciplines. And while many of us started out as participants in the course, since its beginning, the HSTEM pioneers were committed to making our work accessible and sharing it with the broader Amherst community. And as a result of the partnerships, activities, interviews, salons, hack sessions for STEM faculty, et cetera, the humans who have been touched by and who we welcome into our HSTEM family encompass far more than the direct participants. And a lot of the credit for this, encompassing beyond just those of us who have been in the course, a lot of the credit for that goes to the incredible humans at 2 centers that didn't even exist at Amherst 5 years ago. So Riley Caldwell O'Keefe and Sarah Bonnell at the Center for Teaching and Learning have partnered in supporting inclusive pedagogy across the college. And Sarah, who's our STEM specialist, has provided specific workshops, learning communities, and support for our STEM TAs and pedagogical fellows, as well as our faculty and staff. And then Jess Martin, recently joined by Sarah Buell at the new Science Center, has really baked in the HSTEM ethos into the countless community building activities and convenings for faculty, staff, and students since day one in our new Science Center, as soon as we were able to get into it. So what do I mean by the HSTEM ethos? So really, it's this shared responsibility among all of us for living and building as we live it, the STEM community where we all thrive. And there's this really generative interplay between the HSTEM course as the institutionalized engine that drives and cycles ever more students and faculty and co-facilitators and staff and activities, events, resources. And that institutionalized structure then really feeds into keeping the conversation about equity and inclusion in STEM a priority on campus at Amherst, but while really maintaining the student voice at the forefront of the conversation. And importantly, the HSTEM course design empowers students to center their own lived experiences in STEM while grounding them in the national context and academic literature. So it enables them to be the architects of proposing changes to the Amherst STEM community based on their academic foundation from the class, while providing them a structure to partner strategically with campus stakeholders, which enhances the possibility of these proposals and interventions of being effective and sustainable. So Being Human in STEM is an experiment that has been replicated and propagated across the country. These arrows indicate course offerings. And after Yale became the first institution to adopt our model, after the HSTEM pioneers actually visited during that first course we had, we realized that Brown University had a similar course that was also student designed and has been institutionalized and been offered through faculty since that first student designed instance. And what's been really exciting is not just the number of institutions that have reached out to us and the number of institutions that are now offering the course, but there are actually folks who we didn't even know about. I just ran into at an NSF virtual workshop, someone from UT Austin who had stolen our name of Being Human and put it for Being Human in Physics. And so it was fun to run into her. And now we're going to include her as part of our network. And so with this growing network, we've been able to get an NSF grant that was going to support the first national conference for Being Human in STEM this past June, but we all know what happened to that. With things being virtual for this June, we are going to be able to include just an incredible number of teams and really learn and share together about what's been working and how different institutions have adapted and made creative variations in our model. But before we tell you more about Being Human in STEM, just want to acknowledge that we are in the midst of a nationwide reckoning with police brutality and the fatal consequences of racism. And this slide just gives us the tiniest snapshot that doesn't do justice to the unrelenting reality of what Black Americans have lived and unceasingly called attention to for 400 plus years. The size and persistence of these protests testify to the awakening of America, to the urgency of magnitude. And this is to an extent not seen since the civil rights era. And what's been really, really exciting for me is for the first time in my lifetime that there's been such widespread willingness, even in science, to confront our own racism problem. And it's really shattered the myth that science is colorblind and must be apolitical. And while scientists have been undertaking individual reckoning with our roles and reconciling our identities as scientists with our responsibility as human beings, this is really happening at every level: journals, disciplinary societies, institutions, departments, labs, and science is really no longer ignoring the incontrovertible evidence of how racism and other forms of oppression dictate the experiences of our Black, Indigenous, Latinx, disabled, trans, queer, non-binary, low-income, and first-gen students and colleagues, not just in the world, but also in STEM. And while public recognition and statements of solidarity and good intent are heartening, those are not enough, as this Victor Varnado cartoon from the New Yorker shows. We have to do something about it. And unlike what's kind of implied here, it's not the job of folks holding non-majority identities. It's actually something that we all need to commit to, despite the doubts, despite worries about doing it right, getting in trouble, being exhausted, living in a pandemic. We can't just turn to a checklist of internet-sourced anti-racist actions to take, but we need to commit to a daily, lifelong practice of working for social justice, or as Black feminist Lorena Ross says, for the human rights movement. So we are going to describe for you today why we think that the Being Human in STEM course model actually allows us to do that. And it's been refined through collaboration of close to 100 student, faculty, and staff partners over the past 5 years. And we feel it offers the opportunity for folks at any level of comfort, knowledge, experience with issues of equity and inclusion to really kickstart a lifelong practice of being human in STEM. So the course provides the academic foundation while equally valuing and integrating the lived experiences of yourself and others. And it equips participants with tools and practice in doing things like discussing difficult issues, building community across difference, working effectively with a team, identifying disconnects to address, and experimenting with realistic steps towards change. So I always do this when I'm asked to talk. We have to go back to how being human in STEM got started. And really, as you can see, it's this nearly identical moment in the timeline of the fatal consequences of racism in the US. But 5 years ago, this did not trigger the unprecedented global response, particularly not in STEM. But this is the moment of the birth of being human in STEM. And like so many moments that lay the groundwork and are ready and waiting for those of us with the privilege of awakening more slowly, this movement, being human in STEM, was catalyzed by young Black women. So I am going to turn it over to Sanyu Takarambuda, who will explain her role in this moment 5 years ago to help catalyze both the Amherst Uprising protests and in the founding of Being Human in STEM.
Yeah, so I don't know if we're gonna go to the next slide, but back in November 2015, I was a sophomore, at Amherst College, and I would say there was quite a racially tense atmosphere on college campuses across the country, specifically at Mizzou and Yale, and also Loretto and I are from South Africa, and there was student-led protests, the largest post-apartheid protests. So we felt empowered to spark a productive conversation around diversity and inclusion at Amherst College. And so we decided that we were going to organize a sit-in at Frost Library, essential area for all students on campus. And the night before, we went to Fairweather. I remember us making posters for hours and figuring out the logistics for the next day. And then before bed, I sent an email to all senior administrators, letting them know about our plans. And I had no idea what to expect. We had literally only planned for an hour-long sit-in, and it ended up erupting into a 4-day-long occupation of Frost Library. And I was truly moved by my peers. One by one, students stood up with inconceivable courage and shared painful testimonials about their own experiences being marginalized on campus, and basically shared an experience that I have also felt that Amherst has made like such a great effort to bring in a very diverse student body, but some of us felt that once we were there, the college wasn't doing everything that they could to make sure that we thrived. And so that day was actually when I met my closest mentor, Dr. Sheila Jaswal, and we started thinking about how these critical issues relate to STEM education. So, yeah.
Okay, human moment there. So what happened next was to lead to being human in STEM was really very organic in the moment, but with hindsight, it fit into this process that has since become the really process for how we do just about everything in being human in STEM. And if any of you were able to go to the event last week, Biddy really highlighted the importance of listening, and what this moment of Amherst Uprising did for our community was it got us listening to each other in a really new way that we hadn't done before. And you can actually see our dean of faculty at the time and provost now, Catherine Epstein, standing there next to Jack Cheney and listening. And I remember getting an email and another email, like, the students really want you to be here. And so this cycle then starts with listening. And we think this cycle is required both to kind of identify what are the disconnects that are leading to this pain and this problem, and then also to decide or figure out how to bridge that disconnect. And so as a scientist, I have had a history of not necessarily always going into these kinds of things with this process that we're showing. So in science, we often, because we have this idea of science being objective, we don't even get to the point of listening. We don't even get into the library because we're doing very good, important things, but we don't even get in the door to listen. And then we often actually don't, we find ways that we don't validate when we hear the stories and the experiences of our students. And when we reflect, it's often with a lot of defensiveness. And I claim this as well, that, I worked really hard to get where I am. I treat all my students equally. And then rather than partnering, we often say, well, don't, if you have to, or don't let it take away from your science, or it's really hard to change that. If you are going to do it, well, learn how to say no so you're not doing it too much. And the result of that is this disconnect remains broken. And so what happened next then was, why didn't this happen for Amherst? And yet again, it took a young Black woman to have the courage to stand up and reach out to those of us who weren't in the library listening. So Louise.
Perfect. So as you talked about, kind of like the moment, the first night of Amherst Uprising, but after sleeping in the library and then the next day, I remember we all got up and kind of went to class, and it was kind of all in our heads, what are we going to do next? And I remember going back to the library that afternoon where I saw Professor Trapani, and I had seen him the day before at the uprising, and we kind of spoken. And we talked, and he said, oh, well, there's a faculty meeting. You guys should be there. And for some reason, I grabbed another alum, Rachel Abernathy, and we were like, okay, let's go to this meeting. And initially there was some pushback. It was a faculty meeting. It was in the president's office. But we knocked on the door and asked to be let in because we felt very strongly that this was a student movement. And so that moment of being kind of like empowered and supported by Dr. Pani, to both my value of being in that meeting and then also going forward, I also felt strongly, I'd heard from kind of other students that STEM faculty had kind of been like, well, STEM is objective. I don't really see the interplay between the two. And so I decided actually to write a letter detailing some of my experience in the STEM field. I was a neuroscience major, the only Black female neuroscience major at the time. And so I wrote a letter and I actually sent it to all 80 plus STEM faculty members asking for their support. And at first I also did get some pushback, but I also got so many emails and statements of support from faculty being like, we're with you. And I think the reminder that that faculty were also either going through this themselves or that they supported their students, they saw their students, is what gave me that courage to do this. And then later on write more letters. But it was really that first moment of Professor Trapani asking, so what are we going to do next, instead of kind of stepping from that back role. And then going forward, so I was in Professor Jaswell's biochemistry course, and the next day she asked us, we're not going to do biochem today, so she asked us to put everything away, and she asked us to write a reflection. What does Amherst Uprising have to do with STEM? And again, I wanted to do something concrete. I didn't want it to be, I had reflected a bit, but I wanted it to do something that would move it forward. And so then talking with Gabby, we kind of had this idea of doing a special topics course at kind of first investigating what's the history of STEM had been at Amherst, and then investigating the different ways that STEM is taught around the country. And that's really how Being Human in STEM was born. It was one conversation in the faculty lunch over some really good fries. And from there, that's where it started.
So as Louise said, while the students were going through this, faculty, many of us were also experiencing our own resonating with a lot of what the students were saying. And as someone who holds multiple marginalized identities and is often the only something in the room, I really was reflecting on what does the uprising have to do with me? And I remember running into Sonia and Lorado and Katiana in the library the second or third night, and just being like, this is history. You know, this is how we should teach history, and this is how we should live. It's not his story, it's our story. And here we are making history. And so I think this may have been the first selfie. I know it's hard to believe, but 5 years ago, everybody wasn't doing this. And you can see actually they got their angles of their heads a lot better than mine. But yeah, so I treasure this photo. And as I was talking with Gabby and Louise, and then other students streaming in from my biochemistry class, I did what every good protein chemist does, which is one of my most strongly held identities. I went to my dry erase board and I drew a reaction coordinate with a big activation barrier in the middle. And I thought about my own process of getting over the barrier to get to where I am now. And I reflected that, you know, not only did I have 2 college educated parents, I had 2 college professor parents. On Saturdays, I was doing Saturday science with a colleague of my dad here. Our beloved babysitter was a woman of color physicist. And my mom somehow knew to really encourage me to go to a women's college where I had 4 years of no possibility of contamination, of unconscious bias on anyone's part affecting my career and my ability to get my hands on the equipment, although it's a little bit disturbing. This was 25 years ago, so I don't have any goggles on there. But and then I moved on through graduate school, and I came into the protein folding field. The first conference I ever went to as a first-year graduate student, I met amazing people, and I think one of my closest mentors, Susan Marcusy, is on the call right now, which is really meaningful to me. And I landed in just the best discipline to be in, to see myself as a scientist and as a leader, really able to succeed. And so that is how I got over the barrier, and I made it. And you can see that here I said, what do I want to do while I'm at Amherst? This is my job at Amherst, is to lower this barrier for everybody else coming behind me, and especially those who don't have the unearned privileges of that lower the barrier, you know, for other folks whose parents are able to give them every advantage possible. But this is what my job is at Amherst. And so that's what I was feeling during the uprising. And I actually, I was actually feeling pretty broken myself. And so this opportunity to do this course with my students has really given me, as one of the only queer biracial women on the faculty, a space where I have felt seen and held and challenged, and like I am doing the job that I was meant to do. And I am doing the job that Amherst promises we're going to do for my students. So in the meantime, not only did I, go through science, but I was able to marry the love of my life in an illegal wedding because gay marriage wasn't legal at that time. And in fact, here you can see our kids wearing my moms are married t-shirts, and you could see our oldest holding up a sign that says my moms are married, civil rights, because they were worried that we wouldn't, if our rights to be married get taken away, our family will have to be split apart. I also am the mother of a son who I'm just teaching to drive right now, which is terrifying on the one hand because I'm teaching him to drive, but terrifying on the other hand because he's deaf in the ear that will face the side of the car when a police officer pulls him over. So in reflecting personally, but also systemically in these conversations, we realized that there are just so many disconnects in STEM. There's a disconnect between the faculty and staff who, from those letters, can see were totally dismayed that students were having these experiences, but yet faculty being dedicated to student learning doesn't mean that faculty are comfortable with inclusive pedagogy. We recognize the value of diverse students, but we don't recognize the validity of different needs. And, what's just the most striking is the disconnect between the fact that everyone is born a scientist. Toddlers are the perfect scientists. They make mistakes, they get dirty, they just want to know why. But then at every step of the pathway, who thrives and continues is not representative of who we are as a society. And so we felt like this really boiled down to the kind of barrier between being able to be a complex whole human, bring your full human self, including all of the intersecting identities, into a space that was built to exclude many of us. And so that's a barrier to our belonging in STEM. And so as Louise said, this is when Louise and Gabby convinced me to do a special topics course, but then all of a sudden there were these other 9, there are a total of 9 amazing women who worked with us on that. And we went to work at filling our backpacks, our toolboxes. We had no idea what we were doing. But I think we hit upon a model that has been really successful, and we think that has enabled us to both heal as people who have not belonged in STEM, but also have the strength to go ahead and fully embrace and say, no, STEM, you are going to let us be human in STEM, and that is what it's going to mean to be in STEM from here on out. So I will let Gabby, Louise, or Sonia take this slide.
I think I was assigned this slide, so I will start, but please butt in, Sonia, Louise, Ashley, anyone else who's on who was part of this first group. So the course came together kind of in a blur. I feel like there were many conversations that were had, and all of a sudden a bunch of us were sitting in a room together, some of us meeting each other really closely for the first time, and all of us had this connection to Dr. J and a commitment to do some work around what it means to be a human person with all the things that we carry in this field where those things aren't always discussed openly. And that was kind of all we knew at the beginning. And the first few sessions were really, really open. And to Dr. J's credit, she had us over to her house for a session that I think we all remember, where we really shared parts of our identity story and talked about really, who were all these humans in this Humans in STEM course, right? At the time, the course didn't, I don't think, have the title Human in STEM, but it became really clear very quickly that what we wanted to do was figure out not just why we're here right now and to look backwards at how places like Amherst structured their science departments and structured their scientific inquiry to create the structures that existed in 2016, but also to think about where we can go going forward, and how do we get ourselves to a better place. And so we split up and we spent a lot of time doing independent inquiry, doing a lot of literature review. I focused a bit on thinking about the intersection between different identities and how those would manifest in STEM. So thinking about things like imposter syndrome in math students broadly, but thinking about, you know, how the identity of being a Black woman impacts how you study and how you take up space within a STEM space and how that space impacts you. And many different permutations of that. Louise's group, there were little subgroups, spend time thinking about how to bring this somewhere applicable, meaning how do we actually parcel up all of this information and not just send it out to people, but send it out to people with an impact. And then there were groups that focused on the history of Amherst, which is a really important part because I think we learned so much about who we were as a STEM department or a STEM community in that moment based on everything that came before us. And then we spent some time designing a website and we spent some time laughing and we spent a lot of time thinking really deeply about just a lot of stuff. And what came out at the end, I think, was pretty incredible. And it's pretty wild to me that 5 years out of my college graduation, I'm talking about a special topic that I did as a senior. I didn't even write a thesis. Like this is kind of, to me, my capstone experience of my time at Amherst. Both because of the effort that I think all 9 of us put in and everyone who came afterwards, but also because of the way in which I think it has profoundly shaped my approach to my career and everyone else's. That's a little teaser for I think what we're going to talk about later. And next slide, maybe. Does anyone else want to take this? I've talked a lot.
So during the first salon in spring 2016, we kind of invited different faculty members, different STEM members. And also I think we had people come from the 5 colleges as well, just kind of to present all our findings. We had people talk about their own STEM experiences, talk about their own teaching and learning experiences. And so it really was kind of a listening and learning session. And all presented our projects. And I think from there is when it kind of got some more organization. But yeah, this first one was really just the listening and learning session.
So for this, I'm going to introduce you to Megan Lister, who has been the co-facilitator of this course since its second iteration. And she actually helped us structure our projects a little bit in that first semester. And so Megan has been my partner, and you can see that Megan down here. So Megan, take it away.
Thanks, Sheila. So as Louise said, the first HSTEM Salon was an opportunity not just for the students to get together and really synthesize and think about the work that they'd done over that first semester. It was an opportunity and an invitation for faculty and staff to join into the conversation as well. And so I want to talk about one of the interventions that came out of so after that first course, there were a couple of semesters where folks from the first iteration of the course continued working on projects and thinking about what do we want to do with all of this work that we did in this semester in this special topics course. How do we want to carry it forward and turn it into these actionable things that can happen on campus and really allow this impact to be felt more broadly? And so one example is the Being Human in STEM Inclusive Practices Handbook. And it's a collection of resources and activities that were put together to help faculty and staff think about what they could do in their classrooms, small but important things that create a more welcoming environment. But true to the HSTEM ethos, this started from students. And so the students who were involved in the creation of this started by asking their peers, what are the things that make a difference? What are the things that really make you feel more included, more welcome? What are the things that help you feel like you belong in STEM? They also partnered with Amherst Women in Science to collect information about these practices, and they drew on materials that were shared by Professor Ashley Carter in physics, and work by the wonderful chemistry academic managers who have really been at the front of inclusive pedagogy and supporting students in their sections. And so they pulled together all these ideas. And then when they had a draft of it together, they were able to hand it over to faculty and staff partners who were then able to take all of those really amazing ideas and put them together in a way that faculty and staff could easily incorporate it into their teaching. They could easily put it in because they understood the contexts in which these activities would need to be framed, the ways in which they would be inserted into a semester-long curriculum. And it was an early example of this emerging HSTEM ethos that shared responsibility for cultivating a thriving STEM community is really at the heart of everything that HSTEM represents. And that it's just so important to be doing that work in partnership. So I'm gonna now introduce Kristen Greenland, who is another longtime HSTEM co-facilitator.
Yeah, next slide, thank you. Yeah, so in 2017, when I joined the course as a co-facilitator, we were in a bit of a transition period because the pioneering students were mostly no longer enrolled in the course. And we wanted to structure the content to build on their work while also welcoming in a new group of students. And so we developed this course map to incorporate our two main goals for the course that semester. The first along the top is to build community within the course so the students felt comfortable sharing their experiences, and also to develop skills to help them research diversity, equity, and inclusion issues in STEM. And then secondly, along the bottom of the course map, to take what they learned about their own experiences and from their research on diversity, equity, and inclusion in STEM, and then share that out to the broader campus community to hopefully affect systemic change. So after completing these groundwork exercises and designing and implementing their own community-focused project work, the students present their projects at the end of the semester salon. And so this was modeled on that first salon that Louise and Megan mentioned. And this is a great way for the students to showcase their work while also making connections with other campus partners for future courses and future projects.
And since the third iteration of the course, we've continued to build on this idea of a salon and have incorporated an HSTEM summit that brings together students, faculty, and staff from HSTEM affiliated courses at regional institutions. So it started off with Yale and then grew to include Brown. And then over the years, we've had more and more institutions join in. And the summit offers students an opportunity to connect with peers at other institutions and learn about the work happening elsewhere. But it also creates a more public audience for the Amherst students projects, which encourages students to recognize the potential of their work beyond our institution. And the summits are amazing. Like this, it's incredible to see these students from all these different institutions coming together, faculty and staff getting to connect with one another. And this has, was actually, so we were unable to do this last, I think Dr. J was talking about this earlier, but we've received a grant for $49,000 from the National Science Foundation to bring the core HSTEM institutions together to learn from and with each other, to continue, as Kristen was saying, figuring out how does this get structured in a way that other institutions can fold it into their culture and into the work that they're doing. And so we're excited that that is likely going to be virtual this next year so we can incorporate even more institutions than we would otherwise. And so what you can see on the left-hand side of the slide here is sort of the original loop, which was the HSTEM course and all the activities that were starting to be developed and coalescing to become this course model that connected back to the HSTEM process that Sheila described earlier of listening, validating, reflecting, and partnering. And this growing, these tangible partnerships with these other institutions created what is effectively a second loop of the HSTEM network, which grows alongside this expanding Amherst College loop. And this outside network is really a central feature of HSTEM because it maintains an active link to the broader conversation about belonging in STEM. And it cultivates a community of learners and practitioners that continue to grow and support one another as we advance. And I think a key takeaway from the past 5 years of HSTEM is how vital it is to be in community with others doing the work when you're trying to cultivate change.
The HSTEM course is different each semester because of the interests and of the students and also their unique skill sets that they bring. Another unique aspect of the course and a driver of the evolution of the content is that we have a very broad group of facilitators. They each bring their own unique perspectives and disciplinary knowledge. And so this slide shows you all of our facilitators over the years. And what I'm going to do now is turn it over to two of our current faculty facilitators to discuss how they're approaching upcoming HSTEM courses.
Hi, everyone. Can you hear me? My office is now next to my boiler and it just went on, of course, right as I'm going to speak. So I hope you can hear me. So it has really been a privilege to be a part of the HSTEM project, teaching the HSTEM class for the past year. I'm a sociologist. I'm in American Studies, and I've been teaching for almost 20 years. But if you would have asked me pretty much any time before meeting Dr. J, if I would have ever joined teaching forces with a STEM professor, I would have laughed and said, never. It's way too intimidating. But I think that attests to Dr. J's charisma and power. And if you're on this call, you know what I'm talking about. So I joined as a co-teacher last year, and it's just been remarkable. And I just wanted to say a few words about the transdisciplinary part of this project, and then I'll hand it over to Sony. So I think that it's the partnerships that are at the center of HSTEM, the multidisciplinary partnerships that have been really powerful and compelling for me. That the STEM model means that we all have to step out of our disciplinary comfort zones and embrace vulnerability and teach things that are not comfortable for us, and to listen to ideas that we maybe haven't heard before. And that's just been really transformative for me as a teacher and for me as a student, because I really feel like I've been a student in this project as well. And it's interesting to think about the partnerships because they're intellectual and they're collaborative and they're community engagement based, but they've also translated into really powerful friendships. And I think I've seen this among students, but also I can definitely attest to that happening between faculty and staff. And that's just been a real gift. And then I just wanted to say one other thing, and that is I've always been really struck by the data at Amherst that shows that STEM students are much more likely to cross over into humanities and social science classes than the other way around. And I think what HSTEM is doing so well is it's starting to bring the flow in the other direction a bit. We certainly saw that last year with social science students and humanist students coming into being human in STEM, and looking at our J-term roster, we have just a really large number of social science and humanities students who are taking the class. And I just think that bridging between disciplines, and it's an interdisciplinarity that's not just like, you know, anthropologists and sociologists coming together, but really crossing major disciplinary boundaries is just really powerful. So it's been a joy. I've learned so much, and I'm excited to teach with Joe Trapani this winter. So I am going to pass it to Sony Karanyas Bolton, who is also going to join the team this January.
Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for allowing me to be here. I don't have a lot of skin in the game because this January will be my first time teaching HSTEM, but I'm really pleased. Also, thank you so much to all the presenters for giving this such a fabulous history of the present moment that we're in via HSTEM. So I think that's super valuable because I think, I might speak for a lot of people who are kind of really embedded in a very long civil rights struggle that we haven't really gotten to the end of. So it's really nice that we can kind of have this sort of little island in which, facts mean something. Things aren't so politicized that there can't be truth about them, right? But then also kind of reckoning with the real world in a way. So I'm pretty newish to the college. I started in the Spanish and Latinx and Latin American Studies department and in 2018. And during my job interview, the uprising was mentioned, HSTEM was mentioned. So I knew it was a really big deal, but I didn't quite know how big of a deal HSTEM was until this presentation, I have to admit. And so I'm glad that over the years when I was tapping Leah and Sheila on the shoulder, hey, wouldn't I be a great collaborator in this project, that it kind of sunk in and I tricked them a little bit. So that's really great. So I should say that I'm an ethnic studies scholar. I'm a humanist, right? I'm in a program that was started that came out of the uprising as well, YAS. So I think that's really important that a lot of these fields, ethnic studies, for instance, came out of 1960s and 1970s, student movements that really shifted the curriculum. And so I feel like this is such an important sort of, I guess, callback to those times, and that there's similar sort of political energy around and students really having an investment in their own intellectual trajectory to the point that they can actually change the curriculum, which I think is really a co-authorship between faculty and students that I take really seriously. So these are kind of protest fields, Protestant fields, to say that glibly. And yeah, I guess also kind of like the things that I'll be sort of bringing to the conversation as an ethnic studies scholar and a queer theorist. These are fields that have kind of critique, the history of race science and critique the pathologization of homosexuality, which came out of the scientific method. And so we could either kind of dismiss that as, oh, these are historical artifacts, they're pseudoscience, or what does it mean to actually really reckon with that as being a part of, it's not science today necessarily, but part of the history of it, and not to remove science from politics and history, because it's part of it. So I'm really glad to kind of be part of the team. So hopefully it goes well. We'll see in January. Let's check back.
Thanks, great. So it's now my pleasure to introduce a current student, Nicole Chung, and she is going to share with you the student experience of being in the most recent Being Human in STEM course.
Hi guys, I'm Nicole. It's a pleasure to be here and see you all tonight. So I'm just going to walk through a little bit of the virtual timeline that we went through this past spring. And week one really focused on building community norms and trust. Like we basically didn't do much reading, and we spent that first whole week doing tons of icebreaker activities, sharing our stories with each other, asking each other why we were here and what boundaries would be set in terms of conversations we would have. How would we dialogue across difference? And it was fun. It was uncomfortable at times. It was cathartic at times. But I think without that component, the course would not be what it is. So that was like the first kind of setup to the course. And then weeks 2 through 5 were the more traditional part of the course. So we covered topics like feminist epistemology, sociological frameworks, indigenous scientific methods versus Western objectivity, as Sony just mentioned, and bias in science. And many students from our class would remark that Privileged Poor by our very own Tony Jack is a must read, not just for students in the STEM curriculum, but also in the broader Amherst community. So we had the chance to read that book and kind of break down the chapters across the class and cover that material in depth. And by week 6, we were starting to think about how we translated all this academic literature and these broader societal issues into our own lives. And we were considering how social inequality and systems of bias influence our own lives and our stories in STEM. And scaling down these wider ideas into the individual life is no small task, but this time gave us the opportunity to reflect on some of these things. And unfortunately, as you can see from this red stamp right here, this is just when we were all sent home to due to the coronavirus. And so just as we were about to conduct our oral history projects and think about project proposals, we got hit with this moment, right? But this change didn't really deter us from pursuing our projects remotely. And I think I'll speak for myself when I say that HSTEM translated superbly well to the remote format. And that was in no small capacity due to the community building that we did in the very beginning. So I will just, if you press the slide, Dr. J, I can walk us through a little bit more. So this kind of translation point I was talking about from the academic literature to the individual experience, that was a transition point we took a whole week or two to talk about. And we kind of met in small groups to go back through our reading reflections and notes and tried to systematically identify patterns we saw in our readings and identify like whose voices are being left out of these narratives and how can we kind of spotlight those in important ways for our final projects. And we use this foundational literature to research the experience of Amherst alums in STEM and start to percolate thoughts about projects that might enhance the Amherst STEM experience. So this synthesizing step was that critical bridge between making the political and the sociological personal. And then you can slide. Awesome. So as promised, a little bit about one of our 2 culminating projects in this past semester. So half the class got together and proposed a series of workshops and inclusive community models that might be implemented as mandatory components of the STEM experience, regardless of a student's grade or major in STEM. So the inclusion-based seminar, shout out to Claire Hawthorne, would seek to host diverse speakers at the college as a way of exposing students to scientists of various identities in order to represent those students who are not traditionally seen in STEM careers, and to encourage them to chase a degree and potentially career in the field.
School and jobs and
Sorry. And Marie Fagan and I envisioned an orientation workshop that would focus on introducing and preparing first-year students for being a human in STEM at Amherst, and kind of grounding them in their previous STEM experiences from prior educational contexts, and think about what their goals were going forward. Jordan Andrews, shout out to you, I saw you on the call, collected student data on perceptions of office hours, and he noticed a skewed trend in which students of color were disproportionately feeling uncomfortable in STEM office hours, and kind of didn't know what they were coming into college as well, relative to humanities office hours. And so he envisioned a workshop in which students would take a survey and have direct conversations with STEM faculty members about how to address some of the gaps in their understanding of what office hours are. Emma Bowden and Derek Schneider thought about an Amherst Uprising workshop, quite timely, in order to provide a more universal and transparent education on this critical event in Amherst history that's often glossed over or many students aren't even aware of. And their goal was to actually think about what are the demands and the systemic issues at the fore of the uprising, and also how do we create initiatives at the college that will help us address those demands over time. Justin Chen envisioned a new spin on the Take Your Professor Out, or the TYPO program at the college. And he noticed that TYPO is not a mandatory program at the college. And so many students don't opt into this experience of getting to know your professor outside of class, which can be an incredibly isolating thing, especially in a big STEM lecture. So this TYPO Plus that he envisioned would instead be a requirement for registering in a class as a way to incentivize community building and reduce the underutilization of this wonderful program that the college funds. And finally, Claire Carlin, shout out to you, proposed a philosophy of science workshop, which would highlight the philosophies of science that are often overshadowed and even invalidated by Western science practices. And her workshop would really expose students to feminist and indigenous philosophies of science, to inspire students to cast a more critical lens on how science is conducted. You can slide. Okay, awesome. So one of the goals of HSTEM is for participants to continue the practice of being a human in STEM after the course, fighting for anti-racism not only at Amherst, but as we lead lives of consequence in our interpersonal and professional spheres. So after the high-profile lynchings of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, and Tony McDade this summer, we were ready to do more than go to rallies and treat this moment as another iteration of performative activism or another forgotten headline in the news. We were ready to really get on the ground and talk to our families, friends, peers, and communities, not only about police brutality, but ways in which structural racism is propagated in society at large and in our very own STEM and academic communities. And we were ready to implement Biddy's anti-racism call to action with the knowledge that the list of demands crafted 5 years ago at the uprising was just a starting point for a more long-term grounding of our lived experiences in academia. And so as you can see this little bubble in the middle here, the hashtag #ShutdownSTEM movement was a natural outgrowth of this anti-racism momentum this summer. It was a call for all academic STEM departments across the country to pause for a day and evaluate ways in which they propagate anti-Black racism in their work and structures, and sort of make an actionable plan to combat racism in their daily lives. And the HSTEM crew was alerted through the Follett Lab, shout out to physics and astronomy, who provided resources for us to kind of organize a program in under 48 hours, sorry. And several HSTEM alums collaborated with chemistry's own Professor Lopez to assemble an hour-long workshop that would focus on confronting systemic racism in academia, and particularly in STEM fields. And it's worth noting that HSTEM alums helped to organize and educate their departmental communities ever since the summer, by not only getting the ball rolling on having these anti-racism conversations, but also implementing actual structures that will keep those conversations going. So this momentum is carried through things like the Biology Steering Committee, chemistry's Anti-Racism Advisory Committee, and physics and astronomy's CCC, which stands for Climate and Community Committee. A lot of words there. Biology has already worked swiftly to implement a DEI requirement for the major, and chemistry is currently in conversation about following suit. So HSTEM really helps us understand that students, staff, and faculty must authentically partner together and commit to doing the hard work, because real progress is grounded in our lived experiences and the literature and begins with listening to each other. And we can't forget that the work will never be over. Progress is rooted really in these communal commitments to changing our structures and not just our behaviors.
Okay, couldn't tell if I was unmuted. So as you've now witnessed over the course of our talk, which, we had a lot of people, so we've gone a little bit over, but I think it's worth it. And but as you've witnessed, what started out as a special topics course has now expanded or stretched. See how I stretched the title there, to encompass much more. And so the core is still this collaborative course, but the impact expands far beyond just the individual education, although that's very important, of the participants in the course. And so it really serves as the nucleus of campus-wide STEM inclusion activities, and has led to the kind of formation of a huge network of humans in STEM, not just those of us who came through the Amherst course, but also our friends and allies and accomplices at these other institutions. And so I think what's really amazing is that this is really hard work to be done. And through the 3 women who started the sit-in, and then Louise, who catalyzed STEM departments listening and showing support, and then the 9 women who started this course with me, and Megan and everybody who's come since then, we have created a structure that is actually helping us to create the Amherst that we want to have. And as we can tell from how excited other places are, it resonates with other STEM departments who have been to, lots of good intent. People have been to panels, they've been to workshops, they go to conferences. And yet, what does it take to really transform a community? It takes the community, it takes all of the stakeholders, it takes a lot of investment, it takes a lot of resources, but look at the result. And I think this moment in time, when 70 million of our citizens think that it's okay, that democracy is compatible with a president who is racist, anti-immigrant, anti-trans, anti-disabled. This moment calls for something really, really dramatic. And I think we have it. And so what I want to leave us with is just an invitation to you all to participate in this process with us. And so you've been listening tonight, you've heard about what being human in STEM, how it started, what it's become, what the ethos is. We've been validated. So, Biddy appreciates what we've done in being human in STEM and has put us into her 17-point anti-racism plan. But I'd love it if we could reflect, the course only became a full course last spring. Faculty teaching it only got a course credit starting last spring. Think what we could do if we partnered beyond just students, staff, and faculty, if we had infrastructure, if we thought big, if we visioned for Amherst. Let's be human in Amherst. There's nothing that says that this model is solely STEM. Like STEM, yes, we own it. We have a problem with thinking because we're objective, we don't have to be humans, but we're getting over that. And I would argue that look at the faculty, look at the leaders in other disciplines. There's no discipline that's free from racism. And so what if Amherst decides we are going to be that place that becomes known for being human and we are going to take this moment, not just retrench and, but we're going to invest and we're going to break structures. And we're going to do that by involving not just students, not just faculty, but staff, alumni. So I'd like us to reflect on our motto, Terra's a Radiant, give them light to the world. I thought Christine from last week said it so well when she said what the Amherst Uprising did was it helped us shine a light on ourselves. And what I feel like being human in STEM is doing is it is institutionalizing a way for us to shine that light on ourselves, but then also take that light out. And we're not taking some kind of exceptionalism out into the world. We're taking a model that lets everyone do it the way that works for them. And so I invite us, administration, board of trustees, alumni, like, let's partner, let's do this. We know how to do it. We have the tools, we have the community. This is like, we could take this moment and we can come together and fight systemic racism, racist prejudices, and discrimination as we make it a core part of the Amherst education to build into the education a way for all of our students to be able to lead principled lives of consequence that make this a central part of what they do. So I would just like to end by acknowledging so many people with a collaboration like this. There's so many people, and people have, it's hard to get everybody, so I'm sorry if I missed anyone, but we're supposed to be going into our breakout rooms right now, but I think it's really important for us to take a moment now, and I'd love to turn it back over to Gabby to maybe have some conversation with the pioneers, since you are out there living the HSTEM practice. And then I understand if folks need to go, but Gabby, are you ready to take it over?
Dr. J, whatever you need me to do, I'm here to do. I'm just gonna grab my charger. I realized I'm running a little low on battery. So thank you for everyone who's gonna stay. I want to invite really brief intros maybe from those of us who are on the call who are going to be talking about sort of our experiences having gone through this course and being outside of Amherst now and taking those lessons with us. So I know I spotted Sonya's on the call. I know Louise and Ashley. If there are any other pioneers, maybe I'll start with a very brief introduction. We can all sort of share just like who we are, where we're at right now. So I'm Gabby, she, her pronouns. I graduated from Amherst in 2016. I was an art and history of art major while I was there. Spent a lot of time in fair weather trying to sketch during my studio courses, and was also fulfilling some pre-med requirements, and ultimately now I'm a physician working in Bellevue. I'm in training to be a primary care doctor. I want to do queer health in the outpatient setting and do HIV primary care. And hand it over to one of the other three lovely people who are here.
Louise, at Amherst, let's see, I kind of was running around everywhere, but I was on the track team. Also, I was part of AXU dance, also was an RC. Currently, I'm a third-year medical student at UT Southwestern down in Dallas, hoping to go into pediatric orthopedics, love bones. But yeah, that's me in a nutshell.
I'll go real quick. Hi, I'm Sonia. Graduated in 2018. I was a French major at Amherst. Currently in my first year of medical school at University of Rochester School of Medicine in New York. So yeah, it's me.
I think Doyen was maybe going to be here. Tanya, did you see her on here? No. Okay. Well, I would love it, Louise, if you could tell the story about white coats for Black Lives Matter.
Yeah, if you want to put the picture up so it looks more legit. So actually last June, or this June, wow, 2020, what a year. I was in the middle of taking a practice exam for the very important STEP exam. And I got a text from one of my mentors who told me, oh, like a bunch of us are gathering on the plaza, kneeling for the 9 minutes and in solidarity with George Floyd. And I was like, okay, cool, I'll be there. I have a break between my exams. And so I ran out to the plaza, and after after kneeling, some faculty members got up and spoke, and definitely with the HSTEM and Amherst uprising courage within me, I kind of, I felt that a student needed to speak as well. And so, I mean, as you can see, I'm in shorts. I have my white coat on, but I just really spoke about my experience as like a Black medical student and the allyship of having so many doctors around, and how medicine, how we're there for lives, but then also the disparities that exist. And so I think taking the lessons I learned from HSTEM and Amherst Uprising, as you can see, it goes forward into your future careers. And for me, it meant running on stage. I had no idea what I was going to say before I went, but it definitely, people came up and talked to me afterwards. And now I'm kind of known as the girl who was in shorts and a white coat, but it's definitely worth it. I don't know if any of the other HSTEMers want to talk about their experience post Amherst. I know we're running low on time.
I mean, I think it's just worth noting that more than anything else, what I feel like HSTEM prepared me for was starting to have these conversations about the space that we take up in quote unquote scientific settings, right? And I say quote unquote because I think we're learning increasingly, having more conversations around how science, and specifically medicine, is a deeply subjective field. There's been some pretty landmark stuff moving forward in the medical field around how we assess our patients, how those objective measures of kidney function and heart function are just absolutely riddled with racism and structural oppression, like going back to the era of slavery, right? So more than anything else, as we're seeing, I think, big changes being made in medicine, though changes perhaps not big enough, if you ask me. I'm bringing the sort of lessons that I learned in my HSTEM course to these conversations to push both myself and the people I'm in the room with to think about how we can make a field that is about helping others more about the person in the room we're trying to help, right? How do we truly see and serve the person that's in front of the doctor? And that's not a simple question, and it never has been. But I think that the only thing that has served me really, like, truly deeply in that way has been the HSTEM course. I think it's really laid the groundwork. And it's going to be a lifelong thing that we all figure out. That's part of what's really cool and fun about doctoring. But I didn't know it was going to be this hard. And I think HSTEM for opening my eyes to just how hard it would be, and for continuing to help me, I think, hone my practice in conjunction with a lot of my colleagues in medicine.
Any other HSTEM alum wanted, we could still go into breakout rooms. We got pairs, 10 breakout rooms with pairs of HSTEM. You get one more recent, one more senior. Even if you didn't sign up, you could still go into the breakout room and you could hear directly. Maybe they'll be a little bit braver in their breakout sessions, but we'd love for those of you who can to join us. And I just want to introduce Derek Schneider, who is behind the scenes. And Derek, just say hello and say how you got to be in this position.
Hi. My name's Derek. I graduated from Amherst last semester, 2020, and I took HSTEM spring 2020, and Dr. J texted me one day asking me to join a Zoom call, and I said yes, and here I am.
Anybody else who's had me text them and ended up on a Zoom call in front of 100 people, raise your hand. Emily, you've been to a conference too. Yeah, so great. All right, well, now's your chance to hear from the awesome students. And so Derek is going to, okay, so the key is HSTEM people who are in the breakout rooms, don't go to where it assigns you to, okay? Because we're doing a random breakout room, but everybody else go to the breakout room that you're assigned to, and then your HSTEM hosts will join you soon.
Yeah, so I'm going to make the breakout rooms now. If you are an HSTEM alum, do not click join. Please wait. Right. Okay. I'm going to try to start assigning people to the proper rooms. So it's a little trickier. But
Okay, and remember, no, Derek, you keep working. So remember, HSTEM alums, we're trying to, this is your chance to get to talk to an HSTEM alum you don't know. So and because we can't, we don't have Ken Burns to do the documentary for us. So we're gonna do some Zoom recording. As you all know, I love the Zoom recording because that's how I get to keep all of you with me. So, so you have the ability to do the recording in your room. So go ahead and do that. And there's a form for people that they can say what they want to, what consent they have for their recording. Mostly it's going to be for us, but probably one of you is going to say something fantastic that's going to end up on the publicity for HSTEM 25 years later. So I love you all. Thank you so much for doing this.